Hey there, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Schiz and Giggles podcast. My name's Kody. I have schizophrenia.
And I'm Kit, and I have schizoaffective disorder.
And a lot of people listening might not be aware of this, but the most common age for men specifically to develop schizophrenia or psychosis is 18 to 25, which is relevant to our topic today because me and Kit are going to talk about college experience. So I had my psychotic break in college, and a lot of the advocates I work with have been through similar age range diagnoses. So we thought this would be a really relevant topic because this is something we can both talk on. This is something we both have experience with. So I'm going to let Kit start. Kit, tell us about your college experience, how your mental health and mental illness affected it. And I mean, we already kind of know what you were going to school for, but you can talk a little on that too.
Sometimes when I talk about my college experience, I describe it as a immense struggle with my mental illness. I felt like I was constantly fighting to keep up with everybody else. As you guys know from previous episodes, I was a STEM major in college. I was pre-med. So there was a lot of difficulty in my classes as a result. And the college I went to, honestly, I truly believe that every class in the pre-med program was a weed out course. And so I was under a lot of stress as a result of that. And stress tends to make symptoms worse, especially since I wasn't on the right medication and I didn't have the right diagnosis. So I was kind of left floundering in a lot of ways. And so I do feel like I lost a lot of my college years to mental illness. I had good times. I did have good times with friends. I have fun memories and trips I've taken with clubs, and my classes weren't all horrible. I learned some really cool stuff, and I fell in love with science, and that was all really good. And I got to work in a lab, which was also amazing, but I was still battling my mental illness, and it was psychosis, it was mood symptoms, it was all the symptoms of my schizoaffective disorder were just getting worse and worse over the course of college, so that by the time I graduated, it was prime for the disaster that would become my psychotic break.
So I actually started the episode talking about the statistic for men's schizophrenia and psychosis diagnoses, but I do know it's later for women. It's actually closer to 25 to early 30s, if I'm correct. So does that mean you had like an earlier diagnosis then?
I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder when I was 25 years old. And it's kind of interesting because technically that is the right age range for getting diagnosed if we're going to go by the books and statistics. But I actually had symptoms all the way back from when I was 14. So it took
Yeah.
11 years to get the diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. And so I was struggling that entire time.
I wonder if there's any studies or correlations with this. My mom, although diagnosed closer to her mid 30s, started having symptoms probably a decade before that. So she also went undiagnosed for a very long time.
Hmm.
And she, at that point, would have been closer to like an early diagnosis age. But I wonder if that contributes to women having a later age diagnosis then because like I do talk to women who were diagnosed in college. That's not uncommon. It's just a little less common because it is a later age range diagnosis typically. But like some of the advocates that me and you both know were diagnosed in college. So I wonder if there is a correlation that has to do something with undiagnosis, like just not catching it in time.
When it comes to schizoaffective disorder, it's also hard to diagnose because there's so many different aspects to it. And like I mentioned in a very early episode of the podcast, you have to have it for a while in order for a diagnosis to happen. You have to have time for the mood symptoms to become more apparent in order to get the right diagnosis. It's very hard for someone with schizophrenic and bipolar symptoms as part of schizoaffective disorder to get diagnosed with that disorder right away. It almost always starts with a misdiagnosis or two.
What do you think was the most difficult thing symptom wise? Because you also were dealing with, mania, depression, stuff like that. What was more difficult for you to function with at school? Because and I'm never going to try to glorify mania or hypomania. That's not what
Hmm.
I'm trying to do right now. But there had to have been times where that was almost beneficial for you to stay up, do homework. And I know that's not what mania is. I don't want people to come after me, but I would imagine those symptoms might have been a little bit easier just in school than with maybe some of the psychotic symptoms.
My sleep schedule was just, it was horrendous. It was awful. And I would almost be in a state of either being up or down constantly. So I would always have either some level of hypomania or some level of depression. And the way that worked was that I would do as much homework as I could while I felt good. And then when I was feeling bad, I could kind of like go away from it a little bit. And I had one professor, and I wish I remembered his name. He was very helpful to me. He's actually the guy who helped me medically drop a class my senior year because of mental illness. He helped me vouch for that. Um, but he told me that when I went to him and I said, "Hey, I have bipolar disorder," because at the time that's what I thought I had. And he told me that I could actually turn in all the homework for the entire semester on one day at the end of the semester. And that would be an absolute nightmare for a bunch of people in my life. But for me, it was perfect because it meant that I could do as much as I could when I wanted to. And then I didn't have to worry about homework for that one class when I was in a depressive state. But I will say that there were definitely advantages to having bipolar symptoms and even some schizoaffective symptoms. Like, for example, my voices, I would teach them what I was learning. They say in class, "Talk to a stuffed animal," and I'm like, "Well, I just talked to the voices in my head," and I taught them what I was dealing with, even though they already knew the information. But you get the idea. Like, I had a kind of a conversational aspect to it where I could really go over the material in a different way. The most common problem was the depression, for sure.
Yeah.
Having issues getting out of bed, going to classes. I had several professors that would let me arrive late to classes. Like, I had a lot of accommodations in college, which we'll get to, I'm sure. But I remember really struggling when I was in mixed states where I was experiencing symptoms of hypomania and depression at the same time. It's like experiencing every emotion at the same time, like in the same moment. And it's very disorienting and horrible. And when I'm in those states, I'm very all over the place mentally and I can't really know what's up and down. And homework, going to class, it was a struggle. Going to the lab, a struggle. And I had to deal with that a bunch of times during my experience.
Yeah, I had my psychotic break in college, so and without having mood symptoms. That's why I asked you because I don't have mood symptoms, so that was nothing I ever really experienced in my own journey. But I had right away in my first semester, I started experiencing paranoid thoughts. That's what led into my auditory and visual hallucinations and eventually my delusions. And I flunked out of college months in. Like it's nearly impossible to maintain an education when you're in a classroom and people who aren't there are trying to talk to you. I found that very difficult, very distracting. And then a big thing for me was with the delusions I was having and with the paranoid thoughts. I couldn't focus because I believed people were following me or they were watching me. I had delusional thoughts for a while that I was hearing the thoughts of people around me. So when I was sitting in classrooms and I was hearing what I now know are auditory hallucinations, I actually was thinking that I was hearing the thoughts of the classmates that I had, and they were thinking like horrible things about me. So I could not maintain. I was in my first semester. I've just very quickly fell out of all of my classes and I quit going because I started experiencing isolation and it was just nothing I could, like, fully manage. I tried, like on days I was feeling a little bit better and I was having less symptoms, I would try to go back, and it just, like everyone else must have known what was going on because people were uncomfortable around me, people did not want me there, and so, at the time I mean, this is 2013. The school I was going to didn't have resources like they do now. So I went back to school uh, just before COVID, and they had a lot more resources. They had counselors on site, stuff like that, which it sounds like a lot of colleges do now. So when I go and I speak at colleges, I always ask about like what kind of resources they have. It sounds pretty common. So I don't know. You kind of sound like you were able to speak to people at your college and you had accommodations and resources. What did that look like for you? Because that was something I didn't get to experience until I came back to school. I was already medicated. I was already, doing advocacy. At that point, I'm, super stable. I didn't need as many accommodations. So, like, what did that look like? Newly diagnosed, just kind of working through your symptoms. What kind of accommodations could they offer you?
Accommodations at the school I went to were primarily giving you the opportunity to have longer time to take exams or take them in a separate room. that was the official accommodations they provided anybody with a disability. And I did do that sometimes. I didn't do it others. It kind of just depended on how I felt about the class because maybe I was okay taking an exam with 500 other people, but sometimes there were classes where I'm just like, I really don't want to be in the room with all of these people where I'm just stressed out and anxiety ridden. Like I really have crippling anxiety. I used to throw up before almost every single science exam I took in college. And it was not a good time. But I would say that the accommodations I got that really actually helped were born from me going to my professor's office hours the very first week of classes, introducing myself, saying, "Hey, I've got a mental disorder, and this is how it affects me." Because I really do believe that if you are going to college and you have a disability, talk to your professors about it because you'll be surprised what they do. And for me, when I did tell them, I had one professor that she let me come in late, and that was like a participation the credit. She just excused it. She just said, "You've got it. Just, come to class when you can." And I mean, it wasn't like I missed classes, but I could show up later if I had to. And there was another professor I said the mentioned with the homework, but I had another professor who let me reschedule exams like several times over. I was struggling with some bad behaviors, if you will, and sometimes it would be drastic enough that I wouldn't be able to go to classes the next day. And so when I graduated college, my final exam was one that I'd rescheduled twice. And it was the very possible last day you could take an exam. And I first firmly believe that if I had one semester to go after that, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But the accommodations, it was a lot of a lot of the professors just let stuff slide for me. And it was kind of shocking given, I don't know, how strict everyone else had it, if that makes sense. But it was kind of nice that I could go to a professor and be like, "Hey, I have this issue, this thing that affects me, and I don't know how to make it better, but I'm doing my best." And then them saying, "Hey, let me help you."
Yeah.
What's interesting though is that I really only observed the teachers that truly cared in my science classes. If it was other classes, it wasn't always the same treatment, but my science professors were kind of more open to that kind of thing.
Might have just been they understood it better. I hear this from other advocates too who didn't go for like health or science and stuff. I've heard that like some other areas of college or schooling haven't been as lenient or understanding, but could just be like science, healthcare, stuff like that. You would assume, you would hope that teachers in that space kind of understand how to accommodate and help people with mental illness, or even just like understand certain diagnoses. But I know when I went back, because I went through school the first time, I dropped out. That's when I fell into addiction, and so I didn't ever complete my college, and then I just went back in 2019, and I went back for human resource management. And for me, I realized like I missed out on a lot of the college experience because of my diagnosis, because of all the things I was going through. Uh, I always wonder why college is like that age range where a lot of people go through their first psychotic episode. And even people who don't have schizophrenia, I know people in my personal life who went through serious episodes and ended up coming out of it on the other side after either a 72-hour hold or therapy, counseling, whatever. So it was like the stress with school and being on your own and being independent. I think there's so much that we put on college kids that it's crazy that more people don't go through psychotic breaks. I know that sounds bad, but I genuinely feel that way. I'm like, a lot of people, and I talk about this a lot. I went from being a caregiver for my mom and siblings to moving an hour away, not hearing from them every day, not talking to them, starting my new life, paying for my own college experience, and like working full time, going to school. So like, there was so much I was doing. And I see this with like high achieving kids who sometimes go through different mental health problems, and maybe not always permanent, but still do. So I really do believe there's got to be something to the amount of stress and change and life altering decisions that people are making at that time in their life that affects our brains and our mental health. And I don't have studies to back that up, and I don't have any scientific evidence. That's just from the perspective of a patient advocate. I don't know if that's anything you really experienced, because I know you had symptoms before college, but I mean, did you notice a worsening of symptoms? Do you think that the stress of college and I don't know how far away from home you were, how close you were to family, but all of that, do you think that played a role?
Yes, 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 yes to all of the above. My college experience was incredibly stressful because of the major I chose and what I wanted to do, and it definitely just just made symptoms happen more often. It made them get worse over time, and since I didn't have the right treatment, my psychosis was progressing, and it was like the best way I can actually explain it really is like how stressed I was is I have this neurological condition called Raynaud's syndrome, which is when if I get too cold, it happens in air conditioning even, but my fingers will lose circulation. Like they'll just entirely lose circulation, they'll turn white and numb. And that condition is aggravated by stress. And so it happened a lot when I was in college, and I was just like, "Oh, well, it's just I mean, I'm stressed, but I'm not that stressed. It's just happening." When I got out of college, it quit happening like all the time. And so
Yeah.
that was kind of my indicator that I really was stressed out in college. And there are plenty of studies that show that stressful life events can trigger symptoms of a mental illness that someone is genetically predisposed for. And while I did start off college with symptoms, they did get worse over time because of college. And it didn't help that I was about an hour and a half away from home. So I was about an hour
Yeah.
and a half away from my dad. And there were plenty of times where my dad picked me up and took me home and um, just like had a weekend away from college because I needed it because I was really not doing well. And the higher up in the classes I got, the worse the stress was. And like I said before, every class was weed out, and that meant that every class was incredibly difficult. The teachers used to schedule exams on like the same days for the classes. It was just like there was a lot of stuff that was kind of in opposition to the fact of my professors in science being so kind and accommodating me, yet they were still using their course curriculum to really stress out the people in the program. And so it's kind of
Yeah.
this interesting opposing nature of it. But I was so grateful for the accommodations I did get. But yeah, it definitely got worse over time. Would you say that your experience so when did you end up dropping out?
I got through that first semester. I tried to I stayed in for the second semester, so, I kinda maintained my job and my schooling until the end of, like, my second semester, but I started having symptoms in that very first semester of college, and then I just really tried to maintain, and I didn't, right? Like, I was flunking out of classes. I think I only passed a few classes in my first semester. They gave me an extenuating circumstances form, which allowed me to retake those classes for my second semester. And after that, of course, I still failed all of them. And they were like, yeah, you can't continue to go here. But I didn't even make it through that second semester. I was part of the way through, and I just stopped going to classes because I was getting paranoid and I was having delusions. So I just stopped attending. And I was really focused at that point on like, oh, I'm gonna lose my job because also wasn't showing up for work. So I really in that like second semester is when I officially stopped showing up, and they failed me out of my classes. And it wasn't until years later that I was able to go back and try to do schooling again. So one of the things we've recently done an episode about was negative and cognitive symptoms. And people always ask me if that affected me in college and if that's one of the reasons that I dropped out. And I always try to explain to people that the delusions, my hallucinations, were so at the forefront of my experience that I didn't even really recognize the cognitive decline at the time. I noticed it a lot more after I got well, and I got medication and everything. But where you were a little more functioning with your diagnosis in high school and college, is that something that you noticed? And like, how big of a role did those symptoms play in your college experience?
I didn't know what was happening at the time. I just knew that I was starting to have severe memory issues.
Yeah.
And going from having a really good memory, which I talked about in a previous episode, to the not so great memory I have now, it all really got worse in college. And it was like a slow decline, but it was still a decline. Like I almost didn't notice it at first, but then over time I was like, wait, I can't actually focus on these lectures as much. And it would be like I would be in class and I would try to take notes on the lecture, and I would take notes on the lecture, and then I would go back later and I would look at the notes and I wouldn't remember anything that the lecture said. And sometimes my notes didn't make a lot of sense because I was trying to keep up with what the lecture was doing. And it was just this constant struggle with verbal memory and auditory processing. So like if I hear things, and to this day, even if I like hear things that people tell me, I do struggle to comprehend what they're saying in the moment. And then I also had issues with processing things. And so the whole time I was in classes, I was getting bombarded with information. And when you're on a 5 minute processing timer where you can't realize what's being said until after the fact, it's just a recipe for disaster. And it's a problem, and it caused me a lot of issues. And while it wasn't the biggest problem I dealt with in college, that was my mood symptoms. It still was one that made it harder for me to do the work of the classes. And while I still passed my classes, got my degree, I still was able to do all of that. It wasn't without immense struggle and a lot of perseverance. So much perseverance because I wanted to graduate so, so badly, but I felt like I was fighting a losing battle 90% of the time. So, cognitive symptoms for me basically sucked a lot. They were not good, not fun, and I hate them so much. But something I want to ask you about is your college experience in terms of social interactions, about interacting with people and friends and clubs, any of that stuff. Like what did you experience in that domain?
Well, it's tough for me to first recall some of that because I went through a decline so quickly in college. But what I do remember, I'm a very outgoing social person. So, like, I made friends like right away when I got to college. And a lot of them, I mean, all those friendships kind of fell off because I went through a pretty immediate psychotic break and they didn't know me well enough to understand what was going on. Whereas like some people in my personal life were like, "Oh, that's not Kody." They thought that I just was like super chill at first and then got really weird and crazy. So without any context, it was really hard for me to be social. And when I was like, I didn't realize how I was actually acting. In my mind, those occurrences were, very normal. And like looking back and like realizing how unwell I was at the time, it definitely wasn't something that I was like maintaining. I didn't have like ongoing friendships. I had some people at work who knew me, and then through my psychotic break, they definitely were concerned for me, and I'm still friends with some of them now. But I didn't get to really do a lot of the social stuff until my second time back in college, where I was able to actually like join clubs and like I had my psychotic break before I turned 21, so I didn't get to like go to clubs or go to bars and stuff like that. So it was all stuff I had to do when I came back. And at that point, I'm a 26, 27-year old in a class of 18 and 19-year-olds. Fortunately, I am like a super chill person, so I still made friends. I still talk to some of them, but my original college experience, I didn't get the social aspect, and I am a little bummed about that. But honestly, out of all the things I've been through, it's one of the few things that is like a huge detriment to me losing. I wish I would have had more of that experience, but um, I lost so much in that time of my life. It's hard to really like be too upset with not being able to build some of those friendships and have some of that social life. So I know you kind of have talked about this, but what was social life for you like? Because like you had roommates and you were able to attend school longer than I did throughout your break and you were able to graduate. So like what was that like for you?
Socially, I didn't have too many friends until my senior year when I got the friend group that I've talked about in previous episodes that met me when I was in an episode, decided they still wanted to hang out with me anyway, and I got to keep them, and I'm still friends with them. But a lot of my college time was really just me with like a few other people. I had sporadic friends, and I was in clubs, and I got to know people through the clubs, but it wasn't like I had a deep relationship with any of them. I maybe had deeper relationships with a handful of people in all of my college experience. And I do think a lot of that was just the fact that I'm kind of an odd bird. I'm a little bit quirky. I'm quite weird. And I think that kind of shoved a lot of people away, even though I would like to think that I offered something to people, if that makes sense. Like, I have lots of friends now, and that's great, and I absolutely love that I found my people. But in college, it was very hard for me to find people that would actually hang out with me. But I did manage to, I had one like dating relationships. Like, I dated this girl that I really liked, and that didn't work out, obviously, but it was still fun. And I had, once again, sporadic friendships that were fulfilling to me. And my roommates, I was friends with my roommates. I hung out with my roommates. Like they were pretty chill people overall, but I don't talk to any of them anymore. So I kind of had a social life, but I also didn't really have a vibrant one, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like that's a conversation that we should also have with other guests of ours in the future because I can't imagine that anyone living with schizophrenia had a very vibrant social life. Because one of the
Yeah.
things is like it like not only do you always feel out of place when you live with a severe mental illness, even before you're diagnosed, like you know something's
Yep.
not right, you feel out of
Yep.
place,
Yep.
but also like I always joke like I had enough friends in my brain. I didn't also need people. I didn't need people in real life. But honestly, like I feel like because social isolation is so common in people with severe mental illness, I feel like I can't think of anyone I know with a severe mental illness who had like a very outgoing, vibrant social life in college.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, I haven't really heard of it either. It's usually not that for sure.
But the last thing I want to do before we head out is if you have one or two tips for people who are in college now and either they live with a mental illness or they know someone with a mental illness, what are some tips you would give them?
I have two main tips, and these are very, very, very important. I don't know which one is more important. It depends on how you view the situation. The first is that most colleges have a disability services program where you can go and say, "Hey, I've got a disability," and the professors are required to help you by the rules of the law. Like, it's literally a legal thing that they have to help you if you go to the disability center. Wait,
And
actually,
that's so important because, like I said, I didn't know those existed my first
yeah.
time through. I don't know if they were at my college at all when I went the first time.
Yeah, I don't know when they showed up. I went to college in 2014. But I know it's like a rule that they have to give you accommodations if you go to the disability center and say you have a disability. And mental illnesses fall under that umbrella for sure. And so the other thing, and this one is a little bit nerve wracking for a lot of people. I kind of touched on it earlier in the episode, but the very first week of all your classes, sit down with every single professor. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're in the middle of a semester or anything like that, go now. Like, it's okay to do it now too. But ideally at the beginning of every semester, you sit down with your professor, you say, "Hey, I have a mental illness, this is how it affects me, this is what I think you could do to help, please help me." And most of the time, if they're a good professor, they will say yes, but talk to all of them. And it's really, it's a little bit weird because you have to walk in and say, "Hey, I've got this thing that I really don't necessarily like talking about, but you need to know about it for some reason. But I promise you that it will work out for the best 90% of the time, and that 90% is worth it. The other 10%, it's not everyone's gonna be as kind, right? Which is what I talked about earlier in this episode. But for the most part, people will be understanding. So go to disability services, get the accommodations officially, and then go to your professors to explain the situation, and then they can help you even more.
Yeah, and I would second both of those. when I went back to college later on, I did disclose it with all my professors, and it made my life so much easier. It made it a lot more accommodating, and it made it just more comfortable for me to be able to get through my classes and my courses. So definitely both of those. My tip is just to be really aware of not only yourself but your friends in college, because like I said, this is a common age range for people to develop their very first symptoms. So even if you know someone who's very high functioning, has never showed any signs of mental illness, take care of yourself, take care of your friends. Be willing to reach out and tell people that you need help, or be willing to have conversations with your friends if they tell you they need help, because it's a really tough age to begin with, but if you start experiencing symptoms of mental health or mental illness, it can get really bad really quickly. So please
Yes, yes.
reach out to people, and be willing to help friends of yours that might also be struggling. And as always, I want to thank you guys so much for listening, and for all the support you guys have been giving us. We just found out that we have over 2,500 downloads and streams just on Spotify alone.
Woo!
So we appreciate your guys' support so much. It's been incredible. We're continuing to push out episodes, and we have so much lined up and ready for you guys here. And we're so excited. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow us. Kit, where can they follow us and reach out?
They can follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We are Skits and Giggles at both of those platforms. That's skits like schizophrenia and spelled out, and then giggles spelled like, well, giggles. But you can also submit any ideas for episodes or guests to our email. That is skitsandgiggles@gmail.com.
Awesome. And any last words for the people, Kit?
Absolutely. Guys, remember, the brain is a minefield and we brought flip flops.
Thanks again, guys. Have a good one.